countless months of inconsistent and distracted practice, I was sick and tired of myself. I hated my quality of practice and I felt almost purposeless in what I loved most, violin. On January 1st, 2021, I decided to start this challenge I set up for myself, the 1,000 hour challenge. I started this challenge for two main reasons. One, as I stated before, I wanted to improve my musicianship. Two, a larger problem than my violin technique, my inconsistent tendencies as a person. This challenge would require me to be consistent because it's a year-long challenge. That means I can't procrastinate 1,000 hours and practice it on the last day. Oh, and one more thing. I tend to quit or leave things unfinished. Art projects, challenges, you name it. This challenge captures my greatest faults as a human and forces me to face them. Okay, so ground rules. Where to start? What exactly is this challenge? Well, the challenge itself is simple. It's to practice 1,000 hours by the end of the year in 365 days. However, just to make this a little bit harder on myself, I'm going to say this is practice time only, so that doesn't include orchestra rehearsals, private lessons, coachings, etc. do not count. Anytime an instructor or a teacher is present, that time does not count. But the one exception to this rule is chamber rehearsals. Since I am just alone, rehearsing with my quartet or whatever the ensemble is, it's just me and my peers, so that time, chamber rehearsals will count. So next, what exactly does 1,000 hours in a year entail? Well, if you do the math, it's about 2.74 hours a day on average. This seems very possible, right? Very reasonable. It's a very reasonable amount. So what are we waiting for? Let's just dive right into the challenge. Failure is not an option. I wish I could say that I started off the year strong with a great start. Unfortunately, that just wasn't the case. The year began when my cousins and family were still over, so it took me a little bit of time to recalibrate from winter break and get back into my daily routine. So already I began this challenge on a slightly rocky road, already behind. The first month went by a sort of okay trial run. I ended up practicing really slowly and I got some detailed practice in, which I was pretty happy about. And overall, I felt pretty positively about how the month went. However, by month 2, I started to realize that I was inconsistent in my practice. Sometimes I would play 4 to 5 hours a day if I was really happy, and some other days I would play none at all, which already as it is kind of was failing at my first goal in this challenge since I started it because I was an inconsistent person. My quality of practice started to go down and I started to get scared of tallying up the number of hours that I was playing. Days then weeks flew by and I couldn't even bring myself to be caught up. You see, from the start of the challenge I was behind, yes. But little did I know that I would be playing this game of catch-up for the next 11 months. Months went by and I was trapped in a really ugly cycle. There are two things you learn really quickly about this challenge. Number one, it's that 2.7 hours sounds deceptively easy. The thing is, once you miss one day, to catch up the next day you have to play 5.4 hours, and that's already just a snowball rolling down a hill, gathering more snow as it goes. And the second thing you learn is that being behind is way more damaging mentally than it is physically. Once you get it in your head that you're behind, picking up your instrument to just play becomes that much harder. You lose the desire to practice at all because those hours that once brought you the fulfillment of completing your daily goal now just goes to slightly lessen the debt that you've accumulated. And then the less you practice, the less you want to practice. And the less you practice, the more debt you accumulate. And the more hours you're behind. It's a nasty cycle to be trapped in, and it takes a great amount of willpower to get yourself out of it. So month 3 rolls around, and I decide to take this month as a fresh start. I was already a total of 24 hours behind at this point, so I needed to view this month as a fresh start to prevent myself from feeling bogged down and letting another month go by failed. So the goal for this month was simple, to make this month better than the last. End this month with less debt than the previous, instead of such a high goal like to catch up on all those hours I was behind on. So month 3 actually went by really well, the best month so far. I actually played an average of 3 hours per day, which actually ended up bringing me down to only 17 hours behind. That victory felt so sweet, but short-lived as I learned quickly lesson number 3, which was not to get overconfident. Month 4 rolls around and I went on my first trip of the year. After that trip, I felt like I was behind and I also got overconfident from the previous month, so that combination led me to actually be more behind than I've ever been. I was now 30 hours behind total. Went from 17 hours behind to 30 hours behind by the end of April. So month 5 I learned my lesson again, and I go back to being consistent, but at this point I'm starting to lose hope because of these cycles that just can't seem to stop. Summer rolls by in the blink of an eye, and I go on many trips of a lifetime this summer. June and July total, I spent about 4 weeks traveling. And this time, being behind was out of my control. If I had choices to manage my time better before, it was too late now. I felt hopeless to the point where I was dreading even these vacations that I had been looking forward to for so long. So lesson 4 I learned is that your poor actions and decisions have consequences. I totally could have avoided feeling this way, and I regretted not practicing more when I had the chance. I didn't even bring myself to check how behind I was after these trips. I just didn't want to know. And did I mention that I had to bring my violin with me on these trips because I couldn't afford to not practice at all? By month 8, I'd learned my fair share of lessons. I'd spent the entire year up to this point just angry and upset with myself. I was constantly upset with myself, and I was barely practicing to the point where my mom, who would never in a million years tell me to quit anything, seriously talked to me and tried to convince me to let go of this challenge. Because at this point, letting go of the challenge might actually motivate me to practice more, ironically. I was so in my head about being a failure, not meeting the goals that I had set for myself, and not understanding why it was just so hard to reach these seemingly attainable goals. But my mom talking to me just didn't sit right with me. My mom, who never quits, convincing me, who always quits, has a habit of quitting. But for some reason, this challenge, despite being behind basically the entire year, despite being truly miserable at some points, and now this final straw with my mother, for some reason, despite all of this, it never actually crossed my mind to quit this challenge. My mom and I talked a lot that day. Tears were shed. And she ended up saying, finally, "It's not a challenge if you go through it easily, is it?" We concluded that I would finish the challenge. And from that point on, everything changed. That was the final turning point. That day, I mustered up the courage to finally do the math and see the truth for how behind I actually was. I realized I was a staggering 89 hours behind at that point. That's almost an entire month's worth of not practicing, of being behind. Because my mindset was different, because I could actually handle knowing the truth this time after doing the calculations, from then on I was like a completely different person. Month 9, I practiced more than double the previous month. Month 9 was by far the greatest month in terms of numbers, with a whopping average of 4 hours a day. I fell short of averaging 3 hours a day for essentially the entire challenge, for months in a row. And now, not only did I surpass 3 hours a day, I exceedingly surpassed it. I reached 4 hours a day, average, not just one time, average. It's truly amazing what a completely different mindset and a fresh restart can do to you. I played a whole month consistently, slipping up for a few days sometimes when I got sick, but even that slip up, I didn't let that deter me like I did all the previous months. Previously, whenever I had to slip up for any reason, travel, sickness, whatever it was, that would pretty much ruin the rest of my month because I carried that burden and I got in my head about how much of a failure I was. And this time, once I slipped up, I just continued, I moved on like nothing had happened. After doing well this month, I let another one of my lessons come into play. Not to get overconfident this time. Instead of letting myself get overconfident, I treated the next coming months as a continuation of this consistency. Months 10 and 11 came by and I grinded extra hard so that I would be able to enjoy the holidays. This time, I knew that if I wanted to spend quality time with my family, I would have to get ahead. So I planned accordingly and practiced at an even tempo, no pun intended, instead of cramming an unrealistic amount like I would have before. It took me over 8 months to finally become consistent, but I finally did it. After cycles of ups and downs, doing well, doing poorly, I finally managed to play consistently for 2 months in a row. For the first time after 11 months, even though I thought it would be impossible, completely impossible, I finally caught up. I finally wasn't behind anymore. I was finally on track. And at this rate I was even on track to get ahead for the first time in this challenge. On December 31st, 2021 at 10:35 p.m., I finally completed my 1,000th hour. And plot twist, I even had COVID as I was completing that challenge as a nice end of the year surprise. During my last month, I literally played an average of 5 hours a day for the first half of that month. I worked so hard in the beginning half of that month because I wanted to be able to enjoy the holidays and the holiday season with my family. Every single day for about 15 days, I practiced a total of 70 to 75 hours, which is insane for me. I just couldn't believe it. And for the last half of the month, I actually was able to enjoy that time with my family. I went to New York City a few times with my cousin and my family. I was able to enjoy Christmas and New Year's Eve. I knew that at that point, almost nothing could stop me from finishing the challenge. In August, I thought that I would spend New Year's Eve Eve, panicking, crying, trying to fit 10 hours or so into the last day. Instead, I had 2.5 hours left on New Year's Eve. I was able to calmly practice it, spread it out throughout the day, actually enjoy that practice, and enjoy that day, New Year's Eve, with my family. I didn't waste a single unnecessary minute practicing, missing out with my family there, and I just can't believe how calm completing the challenge ended up being. It's so crazy. This past year, so much has happened. In the beginning of the year, I was still in my gap year, at home, sitting right where I am now. I traveled to more than 5 places. I started college. I moved away from home for the first time. And despite all of these changes and circumstances in life, I still managed to fit those 1,000 hours in. 1 year later, on January 1st, 2022, it's amazing how incredibly different I feel. I feel more fulfilled, much wiser, and of course, a much better player than I was when I started this challenge. Did I get better as a violinist after practicing 1,000 hours? Sure I did. It pushed me to time manage to get those hours in when I probably would have been lazy otherwise. But what is the biggest thing I actually gained? I think I grew a lot of character. I learned about discipline and the consequences of not having it. I learned that this challenge was mostly a mental one rather than a physical one. The way that I let one slip up lead to another, and learning to accept that slip ups and mistakes will happen, but being able to move on from them and not let them affect more and take you down a spiraling worse path. I also think I left this challenge with a good habit of time management, a habit of mindful practicing and logging hours so that I can reflect. I got in the habit of using every little moment I could to be productive, practice whatever it was, or at the very least, I learned to schedule my breaks in. I organize my time better every day, and I will definitely not be leaving this habit behind. Number 2, I learned that self-discipline is choosing between what you want now and what you want most. Sometimes you just don't want to practice, and that's fine, that's normal, but that can't happen every single day. In those times, you just gotta push through and remember that you care about completing this goal much more than you care about scrolling Instagram or watching TV in that instant. Number 3, I definitely learned the power of consistency. Practicing consistently because moods change, circumstances change, priorities change. So what does consistency actually mean though? It means stability. It means maintaining your goal despite those circumstance changes. Inconsistency is, let's say, when you're happy and you have a lot of free time, you practice 5 hours. But then when you're busy or you're in a bad mood, you just decide to practice not at all. Consistency is when on your busier days, you time manage better and you still fit those hours in. Conversely, I learned that when you have more time than usual, don't overwhelm yourself with an unreasonable expectation to get way ahead. Stick to the reasonable amount and keep it up every day. I learned that there's more power in that consistency, practicing an even amount every day, than there is in practicing an absurd amount in one day. Finally, this is the first long-term challenge I have ever completed and not quit. I've always been known to give up. I start a lot of challenges and projects I never complete. I'm really proud of myself for not giving up this time. After that turning point in August, I took the challenge so seriously. I pushed myself every single day to get out of that debt of hours I piled up. I no longer let minor setbacks or even large setbacks get in my way and send me down a spiraling path. I learned about the power of mindset, and I learned about the power of pushing through, not giving up, and believing in yourself. No challenge is flawless, so now for some complaints I have. Number 1, sometimes I really did not care about the quality of my playing at all. All I could think about was the time. I got really stressed sometimes because even when I was going through something personal and I needed the time to heal, I didn't allow myself that, or I didn't allow myself to have that time without feeling guilty. Number 2, this challenge can be very unforgiving. Say you get sick one day or are extremely busy one day, travel or family matters or whatever it is. This challenge does not care. That's time you now have to make up. Number 3, it just sucked when I had 2 to 3 hour rehearsals and I couldn't count that time. So sometimes I would play 6 to 7 hours a day and I could only count 3 or 4 hours of that. And that just sucked, honestly. I just want to say that. Finally, something I have to complain about is, at times, this challenge really sucked the joy out of doing what I love. During those previously mentioned lows, I dreaded practicing. And during those times when I did practice, all I could think about was the time. Not the quality, not playing beautifully, just time. And finally, for some words of advice in case you decide to embark on this journey on your own. Number 1, make your daily goal higher than the number that you calculate as your daily average. I calculated 2.7 hours a day. I should have pushed for at least 3 to 3.5 hours a day. You need cushion room because you will get sick. Things will come up. When these things inevitably do come up, the bare minimum just isn't enough. You will fall behind, so you have to account for these hours, be prepared, and give yourself cushion room, or else you'll just play catch up the entire year like I did. Number 2, consistency is key. As I've learned earlier, there's a lot more power in staying consistent than there is in practicing a lot in one day or some days. Number 3, this is a long run challenge. Forgive yourself if you make mistakes. I can't stress this enough. If you make a mistake, move on and don't beat yourself up over it. Number 4, finally, remember why you started. Whether it's simply to get better as a violinist or to test yourself in the ways that I mentioned before as a type of character growth, or both. It could be both. Remember why you started when those times get hard. And that's it, guys. Thank you so much for sticking this long to the end of the video. If you're looking for a challenge to start, go for it. Let me know in the comments what you learned or how things turned out differently for you. Either way, I wish you the best. Thank you so much again, and I'll see you in my next video.